Well, for a closer look at what Trump's policy announcement means for travel, business and other sectors, we're joined by Eduardo Gamarra, a professor in the Department of Politics and International Relations at Florida International University. Welcome to the show.
Pleased to be here.
Now, what were the biggest takeaways for you from Trump's announcement?
Well, I think the most important thing is that this is largely I would say, an announcement that's very symbolic in nature and that's aimed less at Cuba and much more to a domestic audience. And I would say that it's not even aimed at Cuban Americans in Miami, but it's aimed especially at the Miami-Dade delegation in the U.S. Congress. President Trump requires the discipline of the Republican bench, and to maintain this Republican bench united, these Cuban American legislators, especially somebody like Marco Rubio and Mario Diaz-Balart, are critical votes in the context of tax reform, in the context of health care reform and the like. So I would say that that's probably one of the more important dimensions of this decision.
Right. Now, Eduardo, in terms of reaction, we obviously saw a different reaction from Cuban Americans as opposed to Cubans in Havana at the moment. So what would you say are really the pros and cons of this policy reversal?
Well, most importantly, I guess the second takeaway is, going back to your first question, is that this is really not a dramatic reversal of the Obama administration's initiatives. There is no rupture of relations. There's no, we still have an embassy there. We still are probably, maybe we won't have an ambassador, but we still have relations. But the overall impact, I think, and that was illustrated by your correspondent in Havana, I think the impact is going to be felt, unfortunately, by the burgeoning small business people in Havana that have been benefiting from the enormous growth in American tourism and overall the opening of the economy in Cuba. So I think, it's interesting because the message from Mr. Trump is that this is for the Cuban people, but it appears to me at least that the brunt of the economic impact is going to be felt precisely by those people whom he says he's going to help.
So what sort of economic impact then could we be looking at both for Cuba and the U.S.?
Well, the one thing that's important to understand is that there is a significant growth area in Cuba in tourism, and there are a lot of American investments that have been, in fact, teaming up with that sector that the administration is targeting. In other words, anybody related to the military or the defense sector in Cuba, which controls about 70% of the economy. So this could impact, for example, chains like Sheraton, who's about to open an important hotel there, the Four Points. It could impact even companies like Airbnb, who have financial arrangements on how to get paid for rentals in Cuba. So it's going to have an indirect impact. How much it is, I think, we're not really going to know until the Treasury Department establishes the regulations. Once we know the specific regulations going into this, then I think we're going to be able to calculate more precisely what the impact will be.
And to your point about the regulations, we know that Trump keeps talking about getting a better deal for the U.S. When it comes to Cuba. What sort of changes do you think Trump is really looking for?
As I said, I think that these are symbolic changes more than anything else. There's, a better deal, if you go back to some of the things he said this afternoon, we're going to push Cuba to have free elections. We're going to push Cuba in A, B, or C direction. The reality is that the transition in Cuba initiated many years ago. It's been a very slow transition. President Castro is going to be stepping down very soon, as a matter of fact. There will be elections in Cuba. There won't be a pluralist system. There won't be an American-style democracy anytime soon. But Cuba is fully in a transition. Will this accelerate the transition to a more open democratic system? I don't think so. In fact, the concern is that this might, in fact, motivate going back to some of the bad practices, the bad political practices that Cuba was engaged in before.
All right, well, thank you so much for your insights.
Thank you.
Eduardo Gamarra, professor at the Department of Politics and International Relations at Florida International University.